I delivered the divorce letter to my wife's lover's house and revealed that our children would stay with me. She bitterly regretted her betrayal and did everything she could to stop me from going through with the divorce, but it was too late. And while she cried, begging me to stay, with blurred eyes and trembling hands, behind her, sitting in a blue velvet armchair, her lover watched everything in silence, like someone watching a storm destroy a house where he never wanted to live. It was at that moment, between her sobs and his apathy, that I realized, I had won. But the price of victory was the battlefield itself, myself, torn apart. I can still remember the dry taste in my mouth that day, the cold sweat running down my back as my heart hammered in my chest, reminding me that I was alive, but in pieces. What no one knew was that, behind the scenes of it all, I had already assembled each piece of that outcome like a silent conductor. From the moment I found, by chance, the messages on her cell phone, while she was sleeping drunk in our bed after another wedding anniversary celebrated out of obligation, until the moment I parked the car in front of the apartment where she spent her afternoons claiming to be in therapy sessions. That day, I didn't honk. I didn't call. I didn't panic. I just watched, sitting in the car, as the window opened, her face appeared, followed by a quick kiss and an intimate smile that I hadn't seen in years. And then, a male hand pulled her back inside. The curtain closed. The world too. Over the next few days, I didn't confront her. I continued eating lunch next to him, laughing at the children's stories, listening to their complaints about the traffic, the work, the stress. I kept kissing her forehead before I left for the office, bringing her flowers on the weekends, preparing her latte at the exact temperature she liked. Because I needed the time. And more than that, I needed certainty. Certainty that not only was she betraying me, but that she no longer saw me. And it came quickly, like a blunt stab, the day I made love to her, looking deep into her eyes, and she, with a cold whisper, called me by the wrong name. It was then that I started writing the letter. Not just any letter, one of those written on impulse, with cutting words and desperation. But a meticulously written letter, where each sentence carried not only the end of the marriage, but the destruction of the narrative she had tried to maintain, that of the dissatisfied, needy wife, who needed an escape to bear the burden of the predictable man she married. I was not predictable. I was just faithful. But fidelity, for her, was monotony. And monotony, for me, became synonymous with emotional murder. Because, in a way, she killed me. And then, as in any story where someone dies, there was the wake, only in this case, I was the dead person who came back to bury whoever killed me. That afternoon, she didn't expect to see me. He had said he would spend the night with his sister, and I agreed with a kiss on the cheek and a polite smile. I drove to the children's school, picked them both up early and took them to my mother's house, who was already informed about everything. Then, I went to the registry office, signed the papers, took a deep breath and kept the letter in the red envelope that we had once used to exchange impromptu vows. And so I went. I entered the luxury condominium with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. I climbed the steps hearing the muffled sound of laughter coming from above. She laughed out loud, like she hadn't laughed with me in a long time, and that was enough to seal any remaining doubts. I knocked hard on the door. Once, twice, 3 times. And when she opened it, with her messy hair and a satin robe that I bought myself for some birthday, she froze. The eyes sought mine, but found no mercy. There was just an abyss there. Behind her, her lover stood up slowly, as if he didn't know whether to fight or run away. I didn't say anything. Me either. I just held out the envelope. And, with a firm voice, I declared that our children would stay with me. She read the letter right there. His hands were shaking so much that the paper was crinkling between his fingers. The lover moved away, uncomfortable. Her mouth opened a few times, but no words came out. Until, finally, she found her voice, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "You can't do this to me," she said. But I could. And I was doing it. It was a mistake, she tried. "You still love me, you can't just throw it all away." But it was she who played, every time she slept with him. Each time he came home with the mixed scent of another. Every time he smiled looking at his cell phone when he thought I couldn't see it. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And now, it was my turn to choose. She tried to hold my arm. I cried. I begged. It promised change, therapy, recovery, reconnection. He said it was just once, that it meant nothing, that it was just a moment of weakness. But I already knew. I knew it wasn't the first time. And worst of all, she hadn't regretted it until the moment she was discovered. The remorse came not from betrayal, but from loss. She didn't cry for me. I cried for everything I would lose: comfort, the image of a respectable woman, control. Because she knew that I would leave there with my children, with dignity and with the victim's narrative. And that, for her, was unbearable. The lover tried to get closer. He said maybe it would be better if I talked calmly. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that came out like a sob of contempt. I told him not to worry. She would be free now. Totally free to live this clandestine love in the open. But now, there were no more children, house or structure. She would have to rebuild everything herself, from scratch. And, like a silent punishment of fate, he left her a few days later. And that's when the real hell began. She tried to contact me, my mother, her children. But no one answered. He went to school and couldn't see them, the temporary custody was already with me. He sent letters, videos, audios. And everything was ignored. Because at that moment, she was no longer the woman I loved. She was just the woman who taught me, in the most painful way possible, to never love the way I loved again. What she never knew, and may never know, is why her lover abandoned her so quickly. It was something he told me before I left the apartment that same day. Something that transformed the entire weight of betrayal into a cruel irony that only life is capable of writing. Something she will discover, at the most unexpected moment. And when that moment comes, not all the tears in the world will be able to wash away the regret that is yet to come. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, romanticize or justify any type of betrayal. All stories are fictitious, but inspired by real situations that show, without filters, how betrayal has the power to destroy lives, families and trust. Our objective is clear: move you, surprise you and remind you of the value of loyalty. Get ready now to dive into a story shocking, intense and unforgettable. Your experience starts now. Jonathan has always been the kind of man who prefers stability to chaos. He had an almost natural sense of order, not because of rigidity, but because he saw predictability as a type of protection against the pain of the world. From a young age, he was the type to arrive early, to keep promises, to call back even when he had nothing to say. He had worked as a financial consultant for almost 15 years and, despite not being passionate about what he did, he found a certain satisfaction in helping people organize their lives. Perhaps that was what defined him most, the constant desire to keep everything in balance. It was during this search that he met Emma, at a conference on sustainable economics where she, a literature professor at a local university, was just attending to accompany a friend. They had absolutely nothing in common, and maybe that's what made everything seem so right away. Emma was pure emotion. He was the opposite of Jonathan in almost everything. He had a way of looking at the world that made even traffic a poetic place. He spoke with his hands, read poetry like he was breathing and had an intense laugh, the kind that makes people around him smile without realizing it. He grew up in a liberal family, surrounded by art, music and strong opinions. His parents never married, but they lived together for more than 30 years with visible, almost enviable, affection. It was this model of free and solid love that she carried as a reference, and that is why, initially, she resisted Jonathan's methodical way. But there was a discreet sweetness about him, a constant and safe presence that, little by little, gained space within her. The relationship started slowly, with weekly dinners and long conversations about the absurdities of the world, until, on a rainy weekend, they decided that it no longer made sense to maintain separate lives. They bought a classic-style house in a quiet neighborhood, with a modest yard, but enough for what mattered most, raising a family. The first years were of construction. Every detail of their new life together was treated with care, as if they both knew they were shaping something that would need to stand the test of time. Emma chose the furniture with aesthetic sensitivity, sober colors but full of personality, while Jonathan took care of the finances and maintenance of the house with almost exaggerated zeal. Before long, the children arrived, Olivia and Ben. 2 children with their mother's brilliance and their father's discipline. The house was filled with laughter, toys scattered throughout the hallways and routines that were repeated like sacred rituals. On Sundays, it was tradition to make pancakes and watch old movies with sleepy eyes on the couch. During the week, the days ran at an intense pace, with school commitments, work, household chores and, sometimes, small frictions caused by tiredness, but always followed by quick, almost automatic reconciliations. They seemed to work well like that, he as a safe haven, she as a sweet storm. Emma loved teaching. In class, she was intense, present, captivating. Her students described her as someone who made even the most dry content seem fascinating. And outside the classroom, he wrote short stories, some awarded, others just kept in old notebooks. Jonathan, on the other hand, was stuck with spreadsheets and endless meetings. He was respected by colleagues and clients, known for his discretion and efficiency. But, over time, he began to appear more absent in his wife's eyes. Traveling for work began to be more frequent, and even though I was physically at home, I always seemed to be thinking about something else. Still, she didn't complain. She knew that his world was different from hers, and that his way of loving might not be noisy, but it still existed. At least that's what she wanted to believe. The children grew up in a home full of stimulation. Olivia, the eldest, inherited her mother's passion for words, but with her father's introspective sensitivity. Ben was pure energy, passionate about sports and challenges, always looking for something new to test his limits. Emma was divided between school, literary projects, and raising children. Jonathan was dedicated to maintaining financial stability, always concerned about the future. Despite the obvious tiredness, both still made an effort to keep the connection between them alive. They went out to dinner on special dates, exchanged messages during the day, took pictures smiling at school parties. In the eyes of others, they were the picture of balance. And perhaps that was exactly what kept them away from the truth that was growing silently within them. The marriage had begun to lose color, but no one dared to admit it. One day, during a parents' meeting at school, one of the teachers commented on how beautiful it was to see that couple's complicity. Emma smiled, embarrassed, and Jonathan thanked her with a shy wave. They returned home in silence that day. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one of those that hide unasked questions. That night, after the children went to bed, she entered the room and found him sitting on the bed, reading an analysis about investment funds. He watched him for a few seconds before asking if he was happy. He looked up slowly, confused. He replied yes, of course, that they had everything they ever dreamed of. She nodded and didn't say anything else. He turned his back, turned off the light and pretended to sleep. In the darkness, they both heard their own breathing and, for a moment, they felt like strangers under the same roof. Still, time went on. The marriage, despite the invisible cracks, remained standing. Family holidays were still planned with enthusiasm, dinners with friends still brought good laughs, and birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes and out-of-tune music. Jonathan was still present, although often on autopilot. Emma remained in love with life, although often in silence. Both carried secret guilt, he, for feeling that he could no longer touch the heart of the woman he loved, and she, for fearing that that love had turned into just gratitude. But there were also moments of beauty. Small gestures that, every now and then, rekindled something between them. A note left on the breakfast table. A complicit look during a school performance. A longer hug than usual after a difficult day. It was in these moments that Emma wondered if there was still salvation. And Jonathan, even without saying it, also wanted to find that love from before, that initial fire that now seemed like just a warm ember hidden under the ashes of routine. However, like everything in life, what cannot be resolved, accumulates. Small sorrows grew in silence. The unspoken words became walls. And affection became a habit. They still loved each other, perhaps, but it was a love full of memories, and less of a gift. There was no shouting, no violent fights. Just a mutual tiredness, a gradual and silent giving up. Emma started spending more time away from home, due to school commitments and literary workshops. Jonathan, in turn, immersed himself in his work with even more intensity, avoiding noticing his wife's increasing absence. Both began to live in parallel spheres, like satellites that orbited the same house without meeting. The sensitive children noticed the absences, but still did not understand the depth of what was happening. And close friends, upon noticing the distance, preferred not to comment. After all, every couple goes through difficult phases. A new cycle was beginning to form. The type of cycle that carries, hidden in your routine, the weight of a decision that has not yet been made. The house, which was once full of sounds and colors, now seemed quieter. Family meals were shorter, goodnight kisses were more formal. There was still affection, but the flame that once illuminated everything had become a hesitant candle, ready to go out with the slightest wind of chance. And it is in this scenario, with characters as human as they are imperfect, that the story really begins. A marriage on the edge of the abyss, sustained by memories and appearances. A family where love still lives, but suffocated between duties and silence. And a moment about to happen that will transform everything, absolutely everything, irreversibly. Jonathan began to notice the first changes in Emma in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. Small delays, vague apologies, messages answered more slowly and, most glaringly for those who knew her well, silences that were too long for a woman who always had too many words. At first, he attributed it to tiredness, the pressures of work, the overload of projects she kept accumulating in the name of passion. I didn't want to be the controlling husband, the type who sees shadows where there is only tiredness. But there was something about her posture that no longer fit the woman he knew. The kisses became rarer, the touches quicker, the glances more fleeting. And even when they smiled together, there was an invisible wall between them. Jonathan felt, with a silent pain in his chest, that she was present by habit, but his soul had already left. In the weeks that followed, he tried to cling to any sign that things would go back to the way they were. He prepared dinners, made simple surprises, helped more than usual with the housework, hoping that she would notice. Emma was grateful, but with an expression that seemed more guilty than grateful. When they were with their children, everything seemed normal, even happy. But the little ones had only to go to sleep for the silence to settle in again like a fog between the two. And Jonathan, who was never afraid of loneliness, began to fear those minutes with her as if they were hours in a dark corridor where all you can hear is the echo of your own breathing. He wasn't sure when he started to doubt. Maybe it was the Saturday she left saying she had a meeting with the school team and came back with wet hair, laughing about something she said she didn't remember. Or maybe it was the Tuesday when he borrowed his cell phone to look for an old photo of his children, he found the screen open to an unnamed conversation, where just one line of text said, "It was even better than last time." His heart sank and, for a moment, he wanted to believe it was a conversation with a friend, an exchange of weightless feminine confidences. But he knew it wasn't. Instinct doesn't scream for no reason, and at that moment, he heard the scream of something he had been trying to silence for a long time, the possibility that Emma was with someone else. Still, I didn't say anything. He kept it to himself, like someone hiding a wound to make it appear less serious. He continued to observe, attentively, cataloging the schedules, the smiles, the clothes chosen for ordinary days, the new perfumes, the memory lapses. Every day, his soul felt heavier, as if he carried a secret that wasn't his. He wanted to confront her so many times, but he backed away, afraid to destroy what little was left between them. Emma continued to act with a studied naturalness, divided between the role of dedicated mother and attentive wife, and the increasingly longer absences that she justified with projects, meetings, talks. But it wasn't just her behavior that hurt anymore. It was the way he himself was changing, how doubt was eating away at his self-esteem, how her every gesture was interpreted as a possible lie. Jonathan, who had always trusted with so much faith, now searched for signs like someone looking for air underwater. One night, he decided to follow her. He didn't tell anyone. He said he would work late, left the children at his sister's house and left in silence, like someone going to war without knowing if they will return in one piece. He saw her leave the house wearing the blue dress she rarely wore, the same one that, years before, she had worn to a dinner where he had asked her to marry him. Jonathan's heart beat wildly. He followed his car at a safe distance, and as much as he wanted everything to be a mistake, he knew it wasn't. She didn't go to high school. Also not for the cultural center. He stopped in a remote neighborhood, parked carefully and got out, looking around. Jonathan stopped the car on the other side of the street and watched as a man, dressed simply but well-groomed, came out of the building and hugged her intimately. There was no hesitation in that hug. There was no blame. There was longing, desire, and belonging. The kiss came soon after. Long, deep. Jonathan closed his eyes. He felt his stomach turn. He couldn't breathe for seconds. Reality imposed itself without delicacy. It wasn't assumption, it wasn't paranoia. It was concrete. Emma cheated on him. He didn't know what to do at that moment. He stayed in the car for more than an hour, motionless, watching the lights in the apartment on the second floor. I imagined scenes that hurt like stabs. Every laugh she had with that man seemed like a mockery of the story they had built together. And yet, he didn't leave. Not at that moment. I needed to understand, I needed to see how far she was capable of going. He needed to witness the entire fall before deciding what to do with his own shards. When he finally returned home, it was already dawn. He sat on the sofa, stared at the room for minutes, mentally reviewing every detail of the life they had built. The photos of her children, the drawings stuck on the refrigerator, her books spread across the bookshelf. Everything now seemed like the scene of a very well-rehearsed lie. In the days that followed, he acted with calculated coolness. He saved what he saw. He began to record each movement, documenting each absence. Not for revenge. But because he wanted to make sure that when he confronted Emma, there was no room for excuses, for half-told stories. The pain needed to be clear, undeniable, to justify the approaching rupture. They still slept in the same bed, still ate dinner at the same table. But Jonathan was no longer there. He was in another place, inside himself, where he meticulously organized everything that would come later. Betrayal was no longer just an act, it was divisive. And he knew that once that line was crossed, there would be no going back. What hurt him most was the way she pretended. How she still asked him about his day, how she kissed him in a hurry, how she said, "good night," to him naturally. It was the trivialization of love. The reduction of intimacy to a mechanical script. Jonathan saw himself as a stranger in his own home. His children noticed his quietness, but he covered it with hugs and promises of future outings. He tried to keep himself together for them. Because if he lost control, everything would fall apart at the same time. And he needed the fall to be slow. He needed Emma to believe she was in control until the moment he took everything back. It was on an ordinary afternoon, with the sky full of clouds and the smell of rain in the air, that the revelation took place. Emma left for another one of her supposed work meetings and, this time, Jonathan didn't follow her. Stayed at home. He prepared dinner for the children, told stories, said good night. Then he went to the office and opened her computer. The password was not difficult. She no longer cared about hiding it. There he found what he expected, messages exchanged with the same man, photos of previous meetings, audio files with whispered promises. And more than that, he found records of planned trips, places they had already been, dates that coincided with family holidays. He felt a shiver of disgust and anger. Not because of the act itself, but because of the tranquility with which she had been sustaining everything under the same roof where her children slept, where he still made plans. Waited for her to arrive. He sat in the living room, with the envelope he had prepared in the last few days on his lap. When Emma entered, she found him silent. He asked if everything was okay. He nodded. He said he needed to talk. She sat across from him, her face calm. Jonathan then placed the envelope on the table. She hesitated, but opened it. Read slowly. The words were heavy. He didn't say anything. He just watched. And as her eyes scanned the contents, the color in her face faded. She tried to speak, but he interrupted. He just said he knew. All. And that was the beginning of the end. Emma cried. She asked for explanations that she had to give herself. He denied parts, tried to justify others. But he didn't scream. Just listened. He said his children would stay with him. And that she was free to live as she pleased. She begged for a chance, swore regret, tried to touch him. But her touch was now empty. Jonathan got up, took the envelope back and said that this was their last conversation as a couple. She asked, between sobs, if there was anyone else. He smirked. And he simply replied that, sometimes, the only other person we need to find is the one we no longer are. What she didn't know yet was that that wouldn't be the only blow to come. Something even bigger, more devastating, was about to be revealed. Something that would make betrayal just the beginning. Emma didn't know how many days she walked like a shadow, dragging her own feet in a house that was no longer hers, trying in vain to rearrange the pieces of a love that she could no longer hold between her fingers. Jonathan hadn't physically kicked her out, but she knew that every corner of that house was now hostile, as if every wall had witnessed her betrayal and turned against her. I tried to find solace in the little that was left, in the children, in the work, in the memories, but the loneliness screamed too loudly, and the silence that Jonathan carried with every movement was more cutting than any words. She hoped, even then, that time could soften the edges of his hurt, that the children could serve as a bridge, that perhaps, in some vulnerable moment, he could look at her and remember the woman he fell in love with. What she didn't imagine was that the punishment was just beginning, and that the real pain was yet to come. She found out from the school principal. They called to say that Jonathan had officially requested that his name be removed from all of the children's school records. The justification given was straightforward: he was the sole legal guardian of the children. Emma laughed nervously on the phone. She said there must be some mistake, that there had not yet been a court decision that would take her away from her children, that she was still a mother, for God's sake. The director hesitated before answering that yes, she knew that, but that she needed to follow formal procedures until the authorities decided otherwise. It hit her like a whirlwind. What do you mean he was trying to keep her away from the children? That was impossible, unthinkable. Even Jonathan, with all his coldness, couldn't be so cruel. But when she tried to call him, the cell phone called straight to voicemail. He sent messages, and they all went unanswered. He tried to pick up the children the next day, and the security guard at the gate, embarrassed, informed him that the names authorized for pickup had been updated. The list was there, and her name was no longer on it. Her head swam. She even thought about calling the police, but the sense of reality brought her back. He knew that, in the eyes of the law, there had not yet been a final decision, but he also knew that Jonathan was playing with time, with documents, with influence. He was methodical, and she had underestimated his ability to transform when injured. He returned home, or rather, to the apartment he was now renting, and there, among poorly unpacked boxes and bare walls, he cried as if he were disappearing. But there was still something she didn't understand: why was everything moving so fast? Why did he not just walk away, but exclude her with such precision? Something else had happened. Something he knew, and she didn't. And that something was about to surface. It was on a cold Saturday afternoon that everything revealed itself. Emma, after numerous unsuccessful attempts at contact, received formal notification. The custody hearing had been brought forward. That same week, she would be before a judge. The reason for the urgency was a confidential annex added to the process by Jonathan. She ran to the lawyer, read the document with desperate eyes and, for the first time, she didn't cry. She remained static, pale, unable to even blink. There was the name of the man she had gotten involved with. There was evidence, not just of the betrayal, but of what had really happened after the separation. The secret. The final blow. Emma's lover had broken up with her just days after Jonathan delivered the letter. He said he was confused, that the situation was suffocating him, that she needed to sort out her own life before trying to build something with him. Emma begged, cried, but he was gone. It disappeared. And it remained in ruins. What she didn't know was that same day, Jonathan had gone to his address. Not to confront him, but to leave an envelope. Inside, there was just one sentence: "Does your wife know?" And a photo. The photo of the two. At the apartment door. Kissing. The lover was married. Much more than that, he had 2 young children. A life built with a woman who believed he was honest, dedicated, faithful. The photo, when received by his wife, was devastating. She collapsed, left the house and took the children with her. And the panicked man desperately tried to contact Jonathan. He sent messages asking him to stop, not to destroy everything. But Jonathan never responded. He just watched, from a distance, the crumbling of the life of the man who, for months, had been the face of betrayal hidden inside his home. It was a silent revenge. Almost elegant. And absolutely devastating. At the hearing, Emma hoped to defend her motherhood tooth and nail. He took documents, testimonies, tried to show that, despite the mistake, he was always present in his children's lives. But then, the judge asked for silence. Jonathan's lawyer delivered a new statement to the court, accompanied by notarized evidence. A video. The room fell silent as the recording began. It was footage from the school gate. Emma, distracted, smiling as she talked to the man who had been her lover. He held Olivia's hand. Ben ran ahead. The images had no audio, but they said it all. The child's eyes looking for the mother's gaze. The touching of hands. The intimacy of a parallel family. Jonathan never showed up. That was the image of what she had built in secret. A second family, fully functioning. The judge paused the video and said, in a firm voice, that this went beyond the limits of marital error. It was a parallel, hidden construction, and worse, it involved the children without their father's knowledge. From then on, custody would be granted to Jonathan, on a priority basis, until future re-evaluation. Emma tried to speak, but her voice broke. He tried to cry, but his eyes were dry. His soul seemed to have left his body. He sat back down in the chair as if giving up on his own existence. She looked at Jonathan, who wasn't even looking at her. He had his eyes fixed on the ground, as if he no longer needed to watch the ruin. His pain was already gone. Now, only the end remained. And the silence. As he left the forum, Emma ran after him. He screamed his name for the first time in weeks. He stopped. He turned around slowly. She approached, desperate. He said it was too cruel, that he had gone too far, that it was destroying his life. Jonathan replied, in a calm voice, that she had already done it herself. Emma insisted, said that her children needed her, that they still loved her. He looked into her eyes for the first time since their separation. He said the children had not been removed for revenge, but for protection. She said that on the days she was involved with another man, she allowed the children to be exposed to a situation that could mark them forever. That it wasn't about adultery. It was about trust, about responsibility. About loyalty to those who are not to blame for anything. Emma fell to her knees on the sidewalk. I cried without control. He said he couldn't live away from them. That I needed to at least see them. Jonathan bent down, lightly touched her shoulder and said that no one dies from pain, even though it seems like it. She said that maybe one day she would understand what it was like to see her own children smiling at the man who took their place. He said forgiveness might come, but not now. And then he turned and walked away. Night fell slowly, heavily. Emma sat there, sitting on the sidewalk, listening to her own breathing and tasting the purest regret she had ever tasted. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lose everything. And I knew, with a knot in my chest, that this wasn't the end yet. Because love, when betrayed, does not die. He becomes mourning. And grief has its own time to haunt the living. 2 months have passed since the day of the hearing. Emma was unable to return to the classroom. The school walls, which once echoed his confident voice, now seemed to whisper judgment with every step. She was officially removed, for personal reasons, but she knew well that the crooked smiles of her colleagues and the long looks of the students said more than any minutes. She began to live in a kind of emotional exile, surrounded by memories that no longer belonged to her. The new house, if it could be called that, still smelled of fresh paint and loneliness. She spent hours staring at her cell phone screen, waiting for a message that never arrived, imagining her children's routine now adapted to a reality where she was absent. The pain was constant, but the worst part was the feeling of uselessness, as if I had been erased from the map of my own life. Jonathan, on the other hand, seemed to finally be breathing in peace. With the children under his responsibility, he reorganized the house to make it lighter and more functional. He got rid of objects that carried painful memories and renewed the environment with an almost therapeutic simplicity. Olivia and Ben, although they felt their mother's absence, adapted surprisingly quickly. There was stability in the days, predictability in the schedules, security in the eyes. Jonathan made a point of being present in every moment. I woke up early to prepare breakfast, picked them up from school, helped with homework, created small but meaningful rituals, like reading before bed or going for walks on Saturdays. He tried not to show the weight he still carried in his chest, although sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night with his face wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. In the 3rd week of March, Emma was finally able to arrange a meeting with the social worker assigned to the case. It was his last chance to demonstrate some emotional stability and regain, at least, the right to monitored visits. He dressed soberly, controlled the tone of his voice, rehearsed arguments in front of the mirror as if preparing for a play where he knows he will be judged from the first word. In the office, she was greeted by a woman with attentive eyes and slow speech, who listened to Emma's every sentence with a neutral expression, but eyes that seemed to sniff out inconsistencies. After 45 minutes of conversation, the assistant sighed. He said the case was delicate but that a visitation plan would be considered. However, for this to be possible, Jonathan needed to formally approve it. Emma left there between relief and uncertainty. It was in his hands once again, and it was both fair and cruel. 2 days later, he received a letter. Jonathan hadn't written much, but his words left no room for interpretation. He accepted the beginning of monitored visits, as long as they were carried out in a neutral environment, with psychological supervision, and without any contact between them. He also specified that the meetings would be fortnightly, for short periods, and that the children would be guided about the situation in a delicate but firm way. Emma didn't know whether to cry with joy or embarrassment. That concession was all he had, a tiny piece of the life that was once whole. He accepted immediately. He presented himself at the indicated location the following Saturday, with his heart racing and his hands shaking. Olivia was the first to enter. He had a precocious maturity in his eyes and a caution in his walk that did not match his age. Emma opened her arms and smiled. The daughter hesitated for a second before approaching. He hugged her, but without strength. Then came Ben, more direct, more emotional. He hugged his mother more intensely, but soon pulled away, asking when he could return home. The conversation was difficult. Emma wanted to say so much, explain, justify, rebuild with words what she had destroyed with actions. But the children were suspicious, as if they knew that time was now different, that she was no longer the unshakable figure she once was. They talked about school, movies, small everyday events. Emma cried silently when her children left. The psychologist observed everything and took notes. Discreet, but indisputable. It was the beginning of a process that she would have to face with patience, and time, now, was not her ally. Meanwhile, Jonathan's life was moving in another direction. He met Isabel at a parents' meeting, weeks after the trial. She was the mother of one of Olivia's classmates. He had a serene smile, a discreet presence, and his own pain that he also carried. She had been divorced for 2 years, the victim of a story that echoed his own in many ways. At first, the approach was timid, almost impersonal. They exchanged few words, polite smiles, glances that lasted seconds. But something grew there. It wasn't unbridled passion, nor reckless desire. It was the feeling that, in the midst of the chaos, someone understood. They talked for a long time in the school parking lot one late afternoon. Afterwards, they had a coffee. She listened to his story carefully. He did not omit details. He told everything. Emma, the lover, the children, the process, the pain. Isabel didn't judge him. She just held his hand when he finished speaking and said that sometimes, surviving is love enough. The meetings became more frequent. They started going out with the children on Sundays, in public places. Everything without rushing, without pressure. Jonathan didn't hide it, but he didn't make it official either. I wanted to make sure the kids felt comfortable, that nothing felt invasive. Olivia took longer to accept. Ben was more spontaneous. And over time, that new presence became familiar, almost natural. It didn't replace anyone, but it brought something that had disappeared, lightness. Emma learned of Isabel's existence through Olivia. The daughter commented casually, as if there was no great meaning. But for Emma, every syllable was a thorn. Imagining him with another, smiling with another, sharing moments with another woman, just now that she was beginning to understand what she had lost, was devastating. He tried to pretend he didn't care. She told herself that it was his right, that she had no more space in that life. But at night, I cried into my pillow, wishing I could go back in time. On the second monitored visit, Emma brought a photo album. Images from children's childhood, travel records, parties, intimate family moments. Olivia leafed through the pages distantly. Ben pointed to each image as if they were relics. Emma tried to use this as a bridge. He asked if they missed their old house, Sunday mornings, drawings in the living room. Olivia firmly responded that she preferred the new routine. He said his father seemed happier now. Emma held back crying. He asked if they were enjoying meeting Isabel. Ben responded that she was cool, that she cooked well, that she knew how to fold the sheets, just like Mom did. Emma didn't respond. He just smiled with one side of his mouth and closed the album. After the third visit, he asked to speak to Jonathan. For the first time since the beginning of the process. I didn't want to discuss the relationship, I didn't want to fight. I just needed to say something. He agreed to meet her in the school garden, after a meeting. They sat on opposite benches. She took a deep breath before starting. He said he was not seeking forgiveness or pity. I just wanted to acknowledge, out loud, the scale of what I had done. He said that he now understood the size of the loss, and that this pain was not momentary. It was an emptiness that settled into every detail of the day. He apologized. Not through words, but through her presence in his life. Jonathan was silent for a long time. Then he said that he had already cried all he needed to. That I no longer hated, but I also didn't love. And that true forgiveness did not come with words, but with time, and that, perhaps, it never would. Before getting up, Emma asked if he was happy. Jonathan looked at the ground, then up at the sky. Said it was under construction. That there were moments of peace, and that, at that point in life, that was already a lot. Emma nodded. He got up and left. The following week, during another monitored visit, Emma received an envelope from the social worker. Inside was a letter from Ben. A simple letter, written in a child's insecure handwriting, saying that he loved her, that he missed her, but that he now had a new routine and that he was learning to be strong. Emma read and reread, and finally understood that time does not forgive mistakes, it absorbs them, transforms them, redefines them. And when Emma returned home that night, she didn't just take tiredness or sadness with her. It also brought with him the certainty that, no matter how hard he tried, he could not rewrite the past. But I could still try to be someone better in what was left of the way. Even if alone. Even if she would never be loved in the same way again. The silence that night was different from others. It wasn't emptiness, it was the end of a fight. And for the first time, Emma didn't cry. He just stood there, standing in front of the window, watching the world go on outside, and finally accepting that, in his world, the doors had been closed forever. Jonathan maintained his decision to move forward with the calm of someone who went through a war from the inside and survived with deep scars that no longer bleed. The days returned to a routine, the schedules remained precise, and the children's voices filled the house with an almost redeeming naturalness. His life was now moving in another direction, one that no longer included Emma even in recurring memories. Isabel, with her soft presence and calm firmness, had become more than a companion, she was a symbol of a new phase, a chance to begin without carrying the weight of an unresolved story. There was no rush between them, but there was no hesitation either. She understood their pauses, the silences filled with the past, and did not demand answers for pain that was not hers. There was a sensitivity between the two that was built slowly, day after day, in the details, in the conversations without urgency, in the way she spoke to Olivia and Ben, respecting their space without trying to occupy it. At the same time, Emma began an internal reconstruction process, although even she didn't know exactly where to start. The absence of children was not just a pain, it was an invisible amputation. Her identity had dissolved along with her role as a full-time mother. Everything seemed out of place. The days were long, the nights were sleepless. He tried to return to old habits, he tried to find himself in the books he used to love, but the words no longer touched him in the same way. The coffees I used to drink with pleasure now had a metallic taste. The once romantic solitude became suffocating. And yet, he didn't give himself up completely. Little by little, she sought help, immersed herself in therapy sessions that forced her to face her own story without the veil of guilt or self-defense. She began to realize how she had lost herself long before the betrayal, how she had given in to old emptiness disguised as freedom, how her desire for recognition had become greater than her ability to care for her own truth. He began to take responsibility not only for what he did, but for everything he ignored. For the thoughtless choices, for the subtle negligences, for the unspoken words that created silent abysses. The moral dilemma that now confronted her was more cruel than any external judgment. It wasn't just the fact that she had betrayed someone who loved her, but that she had involved her own children in a parallel narrative, allowing them to confuse affection with convenience. She constantly wondered if she deserved their forgiveness, or if the idea of regaining Olivia and Ben's trust was just a selfish way to ease her guilt. On the last visit, Olivia was more distant than ever. He answered the questions in monosyllables, kept his eyes on the clock and, at the end, hugged his mother with stiff arms. Emma smiled nonetheless. I no longer expected to be loved in the same way. Now, I just wished I wasn't hated. Ben, more sensitive, asked if she would be okay. She said yes, and lied tenderly. She said she was happy to see them grow up well, that she was proud, that she continued to think about them every day. The boy held his hand for a few seconds and then let go with the delicacy of someone who understands more than he can say. Jonathan watched everything from afar. Not with the desire for revenge that had consumed him before, but with the caution of someone who knew that the damage done to a soul is not only measured by the tears shed. He saw in his children's eyes the oscillation between longing and distrust, between memory and hurt, and he knew that, no matter how much Emma regretted it, some parts would never be restored. Still, he allowed the visits to continue. Not for her, but for her children. Because I knew that, even though she was hurt, she was still part of what made them. And because I wanted, deep down, for them to grow up understanding that life is made of choices and consequences, but also of possibilities for a new beginning. Isabel remained at his side sensitively. He never asked too much about Emma, nor about the more painful details of the process. She understood that there was a time before her, and she respected that territory with the maturity of someone who had also had to rebuild their story on the rubble of a broken life. Little by little, she and Jonathan created a new language for everyday life. He started to smile more. Dinners are no longer just functional and are once again moments of meeting. Her children started talking about her more frequently, sometimes even fondly. And Jonathan allowed this to happen naturally, without feeling threatened. He felt that he was finally emerging from a pain that had been his only reference for so long. Meanwhile, Emma decided to leave the apartment where she lived. He needed air, new scenery, distance from the walls that had witnessed his worst days. He rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town. A silent place, surrounded by trees and with a constant smell of wet wood. He started walking every morning, taking care of his own meals, reading slowly. He started writing again, not to post, but to understand. The words were filled with regret, but also with lucidity. It was her way of staying alive, of not sinking completely. She sent some of these reflections to her therapist, who encouraged her to continue. Little by little, he found parts of himself that he no longer remembered existed. One weekend, while walking along the shore of a small lake near the cabin, he found a woman sitting alone, crying silently. She was a stranger, but something about that scene touched her deeply. He sat next to her and said nothing. After a few minutes, the woman looked at her and said she had been cheated on. That her husband had left with someone else, and that now she didn't know what to do with so much emptiness. Emma just nodded. You said you understood. Who had already been on both sides. And that no pain was less than the other. They talked for hours. Two strangers linked by an invisible link of loss and survival. As they said goodbye, Emma felt that, for the first time, she wasn't just the one in the wrong. She was human. The following week, he sent a letter to Jonathan. Short, direct, without melodrama. He just said that he recognized everything he had done, that he was grateful for not having destroyed his image in front of his children, that he wished him and Isabel a light life. And that, if one day her children wanted to understand everything, she would be ready to tell them, honestly, without blame, without justifications. Jonathan read the letter and looked at the paper for a while. He didn't respond. Just kept it. That was enough. Ben had a birthday in April. Jonathan organized a party in his backyard. Isabel made a cake, Olivia helped with the decoration. Ben asked his mother to be present. Jonathan hesitated, but relented. He called Emma, said she could go, but that time would be short. She arrived with a simple gift and a hesitant smile. She was well received, politely, but not intimately. Olivia stayed at a distance, Ben hugged her tightly. Emma was moved, but held back. I didn't want to ruin that moment. He watched everything with teary eyes, his son running in the garden, Jonathan talking to Isabel, the children laughing in the background. It was a scenario that could have been hers, but was now lent to her only for a moment. When it was time to leave, Olivia accompanied her to the gate. Before saying goodbye, the daughter said she was still not sure if she could forgive. But perhaps, with time, this would be possible. Emma smiled with teary eyes. He said he would wait as long as necessary. That day, upon returning to the cottage, Emma lay down on the porch hammock and watched the sky turn to night. He thought about how he had started that story believing he knew what love was. And how, in the end, he learned that love is not about feeling complete, but about being willing to lose without destroying. The path was still long, but now there was ground beneath his feet. And even though he couldn't retrace his steps, he could at least keep walking. The end hadn't come yet, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what was to come. In the following months, life continued with the silent weight of everything that had already been said and done, but also with the inevitable presence of what still needed to be resolved. Emma, now with a more structured routine, tried to stay active without clinging to the illusion that one day she would have everything back. Her work as a teacher had not yet resumed, but she began offering creative writing workshops for young people in vulnerable situations, a project that began voluntarily and that, over time, gained shape and respect. It was a way to connect with the world again, to transform your pain into something useful. He didn't talk openly about his story, but he let his words flow between the lines, and the young people, sensitive to the unsaid, seemed to understand. It was in that understood silence that she felt a little more whole. I still wasn't sleeping well. There were still nights when I woke up with my heart racing, replaying scenes I would rather forget. But there was no longer despair. Just a gentle tiredness, the kind that comes after accepting that certain scars don't disappear, they just become part of the body. Jonathan, in turn, was already allowing himself to breathe a little deeper. The relationship with Isabel had become stable, not in the sense of comfort, but of real complicity. They shared small daily achievements, shared caring for the children delicately, and knew how to respect each other's time. The children, although still marked by everything they had experienced, found something close to security in this new arrangement. Olivia started writing texts about family for school. In one of them, he described Jonathan as a calm harbor, and Isabel as the light that arrives when the storm has passed. Jonathan read it with teary eyes, but said nothing. He just kept the folded paper in his wallet, among his most important documents. I knew that nothing would be exactly the same as before, but I was beginning to realize that happiness didn't need to come in the format I had imagined. It was late afternoon, while Jonathan was taking Ben to a local football game, that an unexpected episode began to draw a new curve in everyone's story. After the start, passing through the parking lot, he saw Emma standing next to the car, with a tense expression on her face. The tire was flat, and she was trying, unsuccessfully, to find a way to change it with the improvised tools she had. Ben saw her first and ran over to her. Jonathan hesitated, but followed. As she approached, Emma looked up and tried to smile, but she was visibly disconcerted. He didn't say anything immediately, just crouched down and began to check the damage. Emma thanked her in a restrained, almost whispered tone, and stood there, watching them both. While Jonathan took care of the tire, Ben began to excitedly talk about the game, the plays, the goals, and how he almost scored one with the wrong leg. Emma laughed, genuinely, at her son's enthusiasm. Jonathan, even though he was focused on the task, couldn't help but smile at the corner of his mouth. When he finished, he wiped his hands on his pants and stood up. He said she needed to check the spare tire later, that one wouldn't last another round. She nodded, thanked him again and looked at him, as if she wanted to say something that had been weighing on her for a long time. Jonathan noticed, but said nothing. He just looked at Ben and told him he could go home with his mom if he wanted. The boy hesitated, looked at Emma, then at his father, and said he preferred to go with him. They would stop by the ice cream shop. Emma nodded with a weak smile and got into the car without saying anything else. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. The image of Emma standing next to the car, trying to solve such a simple problem alone, moved him in a strange way. It wasn't pity. It was an almost uncomfortable restlessness. Even though everything between them had ended, there was still an invisible thread that connected them, and that would not be broken by documents, trials, or new relationships. It was the life they had built together, the children that remained the most powerful link between two worlds that no longer touched. The following week, Emma attended another monitored visit. This time, he brought a different gift, a hardcover notebook with Ben's name engraved in gold, and inside it, a series of invented stories with his son as the protagonist. Short children's stories, with simple hand-drawn illustrations. Ben was delighted. Olivia, who had arrived more reserved, came over to browse too. For the first time in a long time, the three of them were together on the same sofa, laughing, commenting on the stories, suggesting different endings. At the end of the visit, Olivia stayed behind and asked her mother if she still wrote every day. Emma said yes, and her daughter asked her to bring a story with her name on her next visit. When Emma left that room, something inside her had changed. It wasn't the hope that everything would come back. It was the recognition that there was still room for her to exist in her children's lives in a new, more honest, more present way. He called his therapist and said he wanted to try mediation with Jonathan, not to talk about the past, not to discuss decisions, but to establish more human communication in relation to the children. I wanted them to be able to talk about their children without needing intermediaries, to at least create a line of respectful coexistence. Jonathan, when informed of the proposal, hesitated. But he accepted. The meeting took place in a neutral room, with the presence of an experienced mediator, who guided the beginning of the conversation. Emma was the first to speak. He said that he recognized everything he had caused, that he didn't want to go back to the past, but that he felt that his children needed a balance that would only come if the two of them were at least willing to collaborate. Jonathan remained silent for a few minutes. Then he said that it wasn't easy being there, but that he also couldn't deny that the children had the right to see that, despite everything, their parents still knew how to talk. Emma smiled discreetly. The mediator intervened a few times. The conversation continued in a mature tone, without aggression, without reviving wounds. In the end, Jonathan suggested that, in the future, they could hold sporadic meetings to discuss the children's needs directly, without this meaning any kind of personal rapprochement. Emma agreed. After this meeting, something also began to change in the children's behavior. Olivia, more relaxed, returned to sharing moments with her mother without so much reserve. Ben started showing the drawings he made, his school notes, photos of his friends. The relationship was still carefully monitored, but there was no longer any tension in the air. The smiles were spontaneous again. Jonathan, even though he was attentive, allowed himself to observe these interactions with less rigidity. He noticed that his children were improving, that the absence of direct conflict between their parents gave them a kind of peace that had previously seemed impossible. And that, for him, was enough. Isabel followed everything with maturity. One calm night, after putting the children to bed, she looked at Jonathan and asked if he still harbored anger. He said no, that the anger had turned into something else, not forgiveness, but understanding. He said that he had understood that, sometimes, love ends not because of a lack of feeling, but because of too much silence, because of accumulated carelessness, because of wrong decisions made in fragile moments. Isabel smiled and said it made him even more handsome. And he, awkwardly, replied that he was trying to learn to be light, after carrying the world on his shoulders so much. Their story would never go back to what it was. But there was, among them all, a new design being drawn up, an imperfect design, full of patches, but which could now be called home. There were still hurts, there were still blank spaces, but there was no longer war. And maybe, for those who lived what they experienced, that would be enough to start over. Because some stories don't need happy endings. They just need a fresh start. And this, although still incomplete, was finally taking shape. Spring brought a different light to all of them, as if the cycle of seasons was finally reflecting each one's inner transformation. Life hasn't gone back to the way it used to be, and perhaps that was the big turning point. None of them were looking for the old structure, the rituals of before, the repeated roles that no longer served. Now, what was there was something else, more real, more raw and, therefore, more solid. Jonathan, over time, was able to look in the mirror and see a man who was no longer hiding behind pain. The betrayal had been an earthquake that broke its structure, but the rubble slowly gave way to a new foundation. He no longer lived on alert, he no longer slept with a contracted heart, and he no longer saw in every smile a possible lie. The relationship with Isabel evolved into something rare and precious, partnership. There was no rush for a new marriage, no urgency to prove anything to the world. It was simply mutual presence. She understood her shadow, he respected her light. Their love was silent, without great promises, but with gestures that spoke loud enough to be heard by the children. Olivia, with the sensitivity she always carried, flourished. His critical look at the world gained space in profound texts, awarded in school competitions. Her words began to attract the attention of teachers, who encouraged her to explore the world of writing in more depth. In one of these texts, he wrote about rebuilding broken homes, and mentioned, without naming, two adults who learned to be parents even when they no longer knew how to be husband and wife. Ben, more energetic and impulsive, channeled his intensity into sports and began competing in regional tournaments. Jonathan attended every game, and Emma, over time, started going too. I sat far away at first, so as not to disturb them. But Ben always saw her and made a point of waving, sometimes with a discreet smile, other times with open joy. Things didn't go back to being perfect between mother and children, but they started to be true. And that was more than enough. Emma, after a long time, found her own name again without needing to rely on anyone. Her workshops grew, becoming a project recognized by an international NGO that invited her to take her methodology to other cities. He traveled and shared his story in lectures about new beginnings and hard learning. One day, after one of these presentations, a young woman approached with teary eyes and said that she was thinking about giving up everything, but that now she saw another possibility. Emma held her hands and replied that no one comes away unscathed by their own choices, but that it is possible to walk with open wounds, as long as you don't deny the pain that caused them. He returned home with a heart full, not of euphoria, but of a peace he had never experienced before. She wrote a book, not about betrayal, but about the journey of a woman who needed to lose herself to see herself clearly. The book was published modestly, but it touched people. Ordinary people, like her, who carried secrets, losses and attempts to start over. Critics were not impressed, but readers were. Years later, at a school event, Olivia was honored for a literature project aimed at including young female voices. Jonathan and Emma were present. Isabel too. They sat in different places, but when Olivia took the stage and mentioned the importance of the three adults in the audience, there was a pregnant silence. She didn't say names. He just thanked the steadfast hearts that, even though they were broken, taught me not to be afraid to rebuild myself. Jonathan took a deep breath, Isabel smiled with her eyes, and Emma held back the tears. It was at that moment that they understood, each in their own way, that something powerful had been healed. Not the past, which would remain scarred, but the future, which now had room to grow cleanly. On the way out, Ben ran up to his mother and said that she felt lighter, as if she had taken off her armor. Emma laughed and replied that maybe she had stopped fighting what she couldn't change. Jonathan approached silently and offered a ride to the parking lot. It was the first time the three walked together for a few meters since their separation. Isabel was waiting for them in the car, talking to Olivia. Upon seeing Emma, he waved gently. Emma responded with a restrained but sincere gesture. Jonathan opened the door for her and, before walking away, said that, despite everything, he was happy that she had found her own path. Emma nodded and replied that she only managed it because, at the right time, he pushed her, even without knowing whether she would fall or fly. Time passed. The visits became spontaneous meetings. What was once a formality became something more natural. Emma regained her children's respect with patience and consistent actions. Jonathan never went back on his decisions, but he stopped carrying constant judgment in his eyes. He learned to live with what happened like someone living with a scar that no longer hurts. Isabel remained beside him. Not to take up space, but to add up. And it was like this, with each one in their place, with their respective truths and responsibilities, that their story found its point of peace. What began with a devastating betrayal turned into a complex and truthful portrait of what it means to love, fail, fall, and still find honest ways to get back up. There were no magical endings, but there was justice, learning and, above all, humanity. Because, at the end of the day, that's what life is all about, making mistakes, accepting them, starting over, and learning that redemption doesn't always come through forgiveness, but through the silent, daily effort to become someone who doesn't repeat their own mistakes. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Which character touched you the most and why? Comment below, we really want to hear your opinion. And if this story moved you in any way, subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the next ones. Here, every week, you hear real, profound and transformative stories. And once again we remember, this channel does not and will never support any form of betrayal. Our goal is to show how it can ruin lives, hearts and homes, and therefore, the consequences here are treated with the seriousness they deserve. Until the next story.